Hi everyone. Hello.
Good
Hello.
morning.
Hello.
Good morning.
Beaming into you from Australia, Paris, and
Pittsburgh.
Pittsburgh.
It still begins with a P. We've gone from Portland to Pittsburgh.
It looks like we might have lost Paris there for a second. Richard seems to be frozen in glee.
Look, at least he's having a good time and he's frozen. That's kind of unusual. Oh, nice. So shall we shall we take a minute together and just welcome us all into this Venus moments that we're going to share with you. And we have been posing this question, why Venus and why now? So instead of us saying any of what has happened in our contemplations with this, let us take that in. Because really we're saying why love and why now? Why Venus in this journey that she takes us on to open our hearts and land deeper into the sacredness of love. So let's just take some moments to breathe that in, to just allow our sacred breath to open our throat, move into our chest, that the heart starts to maybe be curious about this question, why Venus and why now? So that those contractions that often stand in front of our heart may suddenly feel held and might want to dissolve or open just to this very question of our willingness to be curious. Why love and why now? And let that breath move us all the way into our belly, into the cauldron of life that connects us with the greater galaxy. And let us breathe in there this morning as we just let those words, why Venus and why now, enter our system. Let it move with our blood, with the heat, with the warmth, with the tenderness that is offered, with the sovereignty and the vulnerability that can bring. Let us move into this deeper realms of why Venus and why now. And it looks like we have our beautiful bard back, so we might just leave it there, and in case we lose you again, we might just... You're welcome.
Slightly dodgy hotel internet connection. I wasn't expecting that. I apologize. So I've gone on through my phone. So hopefully that will be okay. Yes, I just delivered a conference here in Paris, and I left talking about the Venus sequence. So here I am again, and the Venus sequence is the second in the series of the Golden Path series. And when I say the second, actually you can jump in anywhere along the line because it's a holographic teaching, and the gene keys are designed like that, so that everywhere you go in the gene keys, anywhere you start is the perfect place to start. And so in that way, it's an omnicentric teaching. You get the same teaching that unravels. So the Venus work, though, specifically, as Tanmayo was bringing us into our hearts, it's about love and it's about relationships. And we're here because we're, partly this month we're doing lots of things about the Venus sequence as we warm up to our Venus sequence retreat beginning in November. And these are like massive events in our community, because not only do they take a huge amount of expertise and organization and a multi-leveled kind of community to come together to host them. We have many, many people hosting these retreats with us. You know, this Venus one is the biggest one we do. It's a 6-month retreat, and people sort of go, what, 6 months? And that just means it goes along in the background of your life. So whatever you're doing, it adds a higher dimension, particularly around love and the question of love. And so what it really means is for 6 months, you are going to be contemplating love in all its shapes and forms, but particularly through your relationships. And what that does is it opens up like a transformational path. It quickens in you a route into your heart and into the areas where your heart still holds back from loving. And so it's a really profound journey. And obviously we use your gene keys, your algorithms that come from your sequence, your Venus sequence. And your Venus sequence is a series of algorithms that are calculated from the planet Mars and Venus and their positions as they rotate and swirl and spin. And so they have to do with it has to do with the balancing of the polarities inside us and outside us. And all those questions that come up around love, around yielding and having boundaries, around, you know, male and female, around gender, around identity, around softness and hardness and hurt and healing and rebirth, you know, and Venus has all those qualities. And so it's a very rich journey if you want to consider coming with us. They're powerful. We'll talk a little bit more about the retreat at the end, but that's why we're here. So we're going to give you a preview and a taster today of of some of the process, and specifically we're doing the theme is about finding safety and stability inside our being, inside our body, so that we can enter into relationships and not get completely lost and overwhelmed and confused and caught up in the patterns that, you know, endlessly kind of whirl us through relationships. So that's really the foundation of the Venus work, is to cultivate that relationship with an anchor point, you know, that we don't, you know, even though we may get lost temporarily, and that's okay, we can come back to our center. So it's about cultivating this center. And that's what we're going to talk about today. Anything to add, either of you? Tell us about this theme of, you know, the purpose in relationships and stability in relationships.
Oh, thanks, Richard. It's so good to hear you and feel you, and just to feel this whole group and community coming together live right now. And as I've been working with the Gene Keys for many years and kind of re-entering myself into the Venus sequence these last few months, it's been kind of overtaking me how critical relationships is everything. And that doesn't just mean my relationship to my beautiful, loving wife or my friends or my community. I mean relationship with life. And that's what the Venus sequence keeps showing me in different, unique ways. And I love this topic of stability and safety. These words are really powerful. And I think on some level, many, if not all human beings are looking for that safety in a relationship, whether it's expressed very, you know, because I want power, or I want comfort, or I want recognition, or there are all these forms of safety, of connection, of stability that we're looking for in our life. And the Venus sequence poses this inquiry of, my first relationship is with my body, with myself, with these patterns inside me. And I love this kind of posing this question of, how do I create safety with others? Because that's a very vulnerable thing to ask. You know, it can feel unsafe emotionally, it can feel unsafe physically, and society conditions can make it feel unsafe. And just the ways that we aren't listening to each other can feel very unsafe, can be very unsafe. So safety is very difficult and a very precious thing when we cultivate it in our relationships. And I know in certain relationships in my life, when I find that safety, it is a precious gem. of a space where we each are choosing to witness ourselves and listen to each other. But that is a very difficult thing to do in a world that is not always caring, is not always kind, and in fact can sometimes be violent or be controlling or be abusive. So this is not I really want to be careful when we use the word safety in relationships, that this doesn't take away the necessity to find physical safety, to find a real agency and authority in our decision making with each other. And if you are not in a safe enough environment that is willing to listen to that degree, to find the support that you need to create physical safety, this is a contemplative tool. So the Venus sequence is an invitation for when I'm alone and when I take the time to ask my own body, my cells, my soul, my gene keys, to ask, what does safety feel like? For my gene key of expectation and the shadow of expectation or failure, what is that gene key? What does that part of me need of me? And stability is a different word. Stability is the resilience where when the winds of change come, we don't get so overturned. We don't go straight into the reaction or the repression, that we're responding with life. So suddenly stability is different than, I can feel unsafe and still be in my stability. In fact, stability is a place where we orient ourselves inside challenge, inside turbulent times. So the Venus sequence, it starts with this pathway of core stability, this purpose. And the purpose is not what we do. It's not in the words that I'm going to use. It's not in any of that story. It is the beingness of the essence of my beingness entering into this moment. And my purpose it unfolds inside those relationships. So stability gets to be a part of me that I cultivate by listening to my shadows, learning from them, breathing with them, seeing where I constrict, where these patterns have been in me since I was a child and probably before, and society and all of these reasons that make us constrict or react or repress. And if I have the courage to listen to those essences and what they are teaching of me and practice responding with a little bit more openness, but without losing and giving up my power, with standing in this buoyancy of my heart, of my love, of my body, of my breath, that's what this portal of stability is asking of me. And the Gene Keys, for me, have been a doorway to contemplate these questions of, what is my body explaining to me when I'm in those challenges, and how can the gift of my gift keynotes, looking at that gene key, looking at my profile, how can the gifts of detachment and preservation help me to learn from these experiences and to rise into those highest essence of celebration and veneration? And it's an ongoing journey. There is no state that is permanent in stability. Stability is an active relationship with life. So I just wanted to presence that's how I'm exploring this portal of stability as a constant relationship with life. And then in turn, how that stability helps me inform my relationships to create safety and stability in my relationships. Because I can't control anyone out there. I can't control the government. I can't control the weather. I can't control the other things. But I do get to be in authority and agency in response in relationship with it. So that's what I'm hoping, that each individual keeps creating more safety for our children, for our environments, for our communities, by looking inward and seeing and bringing this stability alive and modeling that through our actions. So thanks for having me here and to get to dive into our lines of our purpose together.
I'll add a little something before we dive in. There's a word that I caught that caught me from when Richard was talking, which is quickening. And I feel when I go back to that question, why Venus and why now, there is a slowing down and a quickening that's happening on our planet. It's pretty obvious there's lots of breakdown of what some of us may call an old paradigm of how we've been living under ideas of who we are, rather than coming deeply into the essential presence of who we really are. So when I heard that word quickening and I put it together with the word purpose, the only purpose is love. we talk about love, we watch movies about love, we read books about love, we talk about relationships, we talk about our kids, the planet, we love elephants. There's all of these explorations of love. And for me right now, there is a great need to see that our deepest ashrams in life, our deepest communion, our deepest forms of awakening is through our relationships. The days of people traveling to India and going to Kathmandu and sitting together and maybe staying there for 6 months as they went through their particular kind of retreat, that's the energy is changing. We need to be learning to be the mystics we are at home in open-hearted, loving presence. And can I give myself the time to allow that into my life, whilst I'm also being bombarded with everything else that the world seems to want to draw my attention to? It's so easy to get lost in the mundane in ways that much later in life we take a breath and go, I need to give this a little more attention. And I feel delighted when I see these 20-year-olds that are already diving in these gates and really asking the questions, and mothers who are learning to parent in a way that is new on our planet, and seniors who are passing that on. That it takes a community, a whole collective of every age and every race and every denomination to come together and find that inner truth. Is love and trust and freedom a big enough reason to give myself 6 months to really open the gate, to walk in the world with it, to be willing to open up to some wounds that need healing? So for me, that's another aspect of why Venus and why now. Thank you.
Thank you both for your amazing wisdom. So working with the gene keys and these sequences is a very magical process. As you've heard, it's a contemplative process. It unlocks in us gradually. It requires big spans of time in order for the transformations to move through us and for us to integrate them. And that is a matter of months and in some cases years. And so what we have with the gene keys is frameworks and structures that allow us to follow and unpick the tapestry that has been woven throughout our life, that keeps us embedded in shadow patterns that kind of undermine us, that trip us up over and over and over again. And sometimes it takes something like this, a tool like this, to really mirror back to us exactly why it is that we keep drawing in certain situations and certain patterns into our life and relationships. So we get to see them specifically through the gene keys. So when you end the Venus sequence, you'll see there are 6 gene keys that relate to different aspects of love and your field of love in life. And the first one that we're looking at is just the first one you look at in the sequence generally is the base one. It's called purpose. We call it stability here, but it's purpose. It's about what is my sense of inner being and my sense of purpose, my inner purpose. If I can carry that into my relationships, then I will have the resilience to be able to kind of bend and shape myself to the storms of life that come and go throughout life in our relationships. So whenever you're looking at relationships, you're looking at 2 wound patterns, that are playing a dance with each other. And so the Venus sequence, and specifically this first one, helps us to unpick some of those wound patterns, to see, well, that's my pattern. It doesn't even matter what the other person's pattern is, actually. And I even caution people not to bother, looking at what their pattern is, because then you can use it as a weapon. It's better if you don't know about anyone else. Just look at your own, and then really, really work with that and own that. And so you've got the gene key, but then you've got 6 archetypes, 6 lines. Every key has one of 6 lines. And when you look at, as Elijah put up on the screen earlier, you'll see that in your profile, when you look at the number for the gene key, which is a number between 1 and 64, and then there's a dot, a decimal point, and then after that is a number between 1 and 6, and that number is the line number. And there are only 6 lines because these hexagrams are made up of lines, of 6 lines in each one, and those 6 themes repeat themselves in different iterations throughout all the sequences of the golden path of these teachings. So you get to know them really well as you come into them. And they're a bit like music, where you have the octaves and you have these notes and they repeat in different colors, but it's the same scale, it's the same note that's being sounded in each of the gene keys, in each of the spheres, and each of the lines. So it's really interesting, and the lines are very colorful because you can look at them and in this instance, we're looking at like 6 lines and their shadow keynotes and 6 lines and their higher keynotes, right? So you can see it from the bump we sent out, that line 1 is the anchor, and that's the higher keynote. And the line 1, we'll talk about these in a minute. The line 1 is always the base, but on the other flip side, it's the loner. It's the one that cuts himself off. And loner, it doesn't mean loner in a kind of nice way. That we'll talk about that. It means like isolated loner. The natural, and then the accuser. Those are again, that's a flip side. The adventurer, the escape artist, the nurturer, the politician, the leader, the victim, the visionary, the judge. We're going to dive into these and get to see, and you will see which one you are. And you may also think, well, I have a bit of that one as well. And that's true in a way, because even though, we have one that's, specifically encoded for us, you may also have other lines that have aspects of that in them as well. And so in a way, we play out often all of them in different ways at different times. And sometimes when you're in interaction with someone, let's say they're the accuser and you're the judge, your judge might be quite kind of distant, but then you slide into their accuser pattern, and normally you wouldn't do that. But because they're there and you're activated, both of you slide into each other's patterns, and it becomes this kind of melee of chaos. And afterwards you think, why, that wasn't me, why didn't I do that? I never normally do that or say those kind of things, and that's how it is when the heat is on. So let's dive in, and also you can share in the chat. We'll start with number 1 and we'll go to 6, and you can put in the chat which you are, and if you're a line 1, you can put in your gene key as well, and we'll pick a few and have a little play and see where we get to. So start with line 1. Elijah, do you want to start?
Sure. I'll put this on the screen here just so that you can, just as a reminder, if you are looking for your line, just that quick reminder, you can get your free profile, and we're clicking that sphere of purpose and you'll see that decimal. So mine is 42.2, as you can see there. And that's what the line that we're going to be looking at a lot today. And this presentation with these keynotes are going to be available with the replay, and they're available to download if you want to explore this yourself. But line 1, looking at the positive and negative nature, the anchor and the loner. You're a rock for others. And I love seeing these different inner strength, outer strength, and highest potential. To stand up for yourself in a firm but kind way is the inner strength. Listening to the needs of others, that outer strength. And your confidence makes others feel secure. And, we often, Tanmayo and I often call it the mountain, this feeling of when you feel this person in the room, when I feel my friends that have this line 1 anchor in the room, you can just feel this indestructible love, this good gravity in the space. And the anchor is so powerful for that, of when that line 1 is feeling boldly itself, from the bones on through, the whole room benefits from that love. but it takes a great investigative, like, deep dive. The line one has to go really deep inside and be very honest with itself. And that's why you see on the negative nature, sometimes that can make it be a loner, the tendency to shut down, the kind of pushing too far inward, or as a repressive tendency, not standing up for oneself, constantly feeling like the foundation is being shattered, is being rocked, and you're not able to trust in that rock that is you. Or if it's reactive, it's pushing that mountainous energy to force that point of view against someone else. So really looking at that block of driven by the need to feel secure. In the line one, I always ask that question, because I have a lot of line ones in my Venus sequence, of am I trying to build a foundation based off of a mental framework, something that because when our worldviews get shattered, it's terrifying to suddenly feel insecure. So I always ask that question. If you're looking at your line one, to dive deeply inward, to let yourself take the time to pause and go inward, but bring that inwardness with you in a place of feeling that solitude is not an isolation, but is actually that you get to be you, no matter what anyone says around you. It doesn't mean block yourself off from their feedback or their love, but you are boldly here to be you, and feel it in your bones. And when you don't, take the pause, take the time that you need to your routines, your habits, what makes you feel healthy and secure in your body, and keep asking that questions. What does my purpose, Gene Key, need to feel secure?
Yeah, well, beautiful introduction, Elijah. And let's pick a few from in the chat. I can see DJ Hawley, DJ. 26, line one. Now look, the shadow of 26 is pride. Is that right? Have I got that right?
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes I forget. Yeah, so, pride will be a kind of marker for you. It will be the thing that either kind of makes you stronger, or the thing that undermines you. And you can look at this with whenever you look at your shadow, the shadow that you have of that key in your purpose, it's going to give you a clue as to what is it that is making me stronger as an anchor, or what is it that's undermining me. And then the tendency is either to push people away by forcibly pushing them away, or pushing them away by kind of contracting inside myself. And we put in here repressive and reactive tendencies, and basically we can be a bit of both of those, but we tend to fall on one side more than the other. And I'm sure you already know which one you are. Introverts tend to be a little bit more the inner, extroverts tend to be a little bit more the reactive. But generally we can have a bit of both, and it depends on the situation and the circumstance, and how intense it is. And if it's just like an everyday thing, your tendency will probably be one or the other. If there's a big fight going on, then maybe their reactive side will come out more. Anyway, it depends. It depends on a lot of things. So the main thing is just to look at the line and see, well, look, if it's pride that activates it, or it might be 34, line one, someone has Reiki, and that would be force, and so when someone else tries to force you into something, this is the pattern that will come up. You either shut yourself away, or you force it back, and because it makes you feel insecure. Someone's forcing you into something. It's like there's this thing inside you that you want to go and find your own insecurity, or you look for it outside. And so a pattern comes out of that block that you've got inside yourself. So you really have to see, what is the deep motivation behind my behavior. So as I said, when we say the word loner can be like, oh, I'm a loner, yeah. And I don't mean it so much like that, as it's like a kind of part that cuts ourselves off from others and isolates oneself because of fear, essentially. If you dig deep enough, you'll see it's because of fear, because you don't want to feel that instability, because whenever that person pushes that view, or whenever that person does that pattern, it makes you feel insecure in your body, and that does not feel good. So the anchor is the side, you know, and it could, as I said, it could be pride, it could be any of the shadows. You know, look at your shadow and see what is the thing that's driving it. But also look at the gift. And so I begin to use that energy and find the power and the strength in it. How can I begin to become that stable being, that confidence, deep, self-assured, confident man or woman or, you know, person? And then as you build that, as you're able to turn that around and transform that pattern, transform that shadow through accepting it, through really understanding it deeply and owning it fully, your pattern, not the other person's pattern, yours. You got to extricate yourself from their pattern. And you do that by kind of owning your own and just really going, okay. And that's when, in that vulnerable moment where you would own it yourself, that's where that strength suddenly appears from, you know, that inner strength. And that's what gives you a kind of a breakthrough, basically, a breakthrough, you know. And so maybe when you have that breakthrough for the first time ever, you fully stand up for yourself, the first time in years, you know, or for the first time in years, you suddenly yield and you fully listen to the other person's whatever it is coming at you. You really take it in because you're no longer afraid it's going to hurt you, because you found that inner stability. And then you can hear whatever you want to hear. And it doesn't matter, even if it can be quite toxic. You can just listen to it in a, you know, and just, and perhaps even empathize, even if it's not uncomfortable for you to hear. You know, you can perhaps begin to empathize with where that person's coming from, even though they may not be saying it in a gracious way. Hopefully they will, but sometimes it's not that way. So look at the keys, look at the lines together, start to kind of weave together the story, and, you know, use your intuition and your imagination and your contemplation, and maybe a discussion with someone you know and you love, you know, maybe not the one that's brought up the pattern. And that's a really great way to learn, you know, especially that's why in the Venus sequence and in our retreats, we learn together, because then we own our own stuff, and you watch someone owning their pattern and you suddenly get a kind of hit from that and you realize, oh yeah, I can do that. And that's how it works. That's how this transformational tool works. So anything you want to say about line 1, Tanmayo, before we move to line 2?
No, I think you guys will keep it like that, tight, so that we get time for them all. Thank you for asking.
Yeah, we don't want to get to line 6 and run out of time.
Yes.
So line 2. Tanmayo, do you want to say something about line 2, since you know it well?
Line 2. Well, as I have a line 2 in purpose. So this beautiful line 2 that it's the natural. It makes everything look easy. It doesn't mean that line 2 experiences that itself all the time, but to others that can look like it's the truth. And they have an inner strength of responding to life spontaneously, and the outer strength being at peace with others, and the highest potential. Your easygoing nature allows everyone around you to relax. Wow, that sounds really beautiful, doesn't it? The other side's not so much. So the second line can really be accusing, not accepting responsibility for their own behavior, and then the repressed tendency, burying your head in the sand, the reactive tendency, responding with angry outbursts. Of course we do. When we're in that reactive moment, you are totally unaware of your effect on others. You know, what happens for me immediately is that, you know, that first and second lines, they're very physical. You know, it's like when you meet the first line, and it's when it's in its strength, it's that secure feeling of being there with a rock, or with with something that's so stable that you could actually lean on it and feel secure. And with the second line, you know, there's this big energy that's actually the flow of the universe itself is flowing through the second line when it's totally relaxed and in flow. so that there's a different quality to the holding. And when I heard you talking about line 1, how they disappear inside. But you know, the second line disappears in another way by accusing. You're to blame, you did it, they did it. Somebody has to be to blame for whatever is going on when the second line is triggered. So it's coming back to yourself, you know, for that second line. And if you're in the repressed place, it acts a little bit differently. But even although you're not speaking it out, it doesn't mean you're not feeling it. Somebody did it to you on some level. So there is that responsibility for the own behavior, is to notice that when you have these very physical lines, you know, the second line gets observed by the very nature of their naturalness. People notice second lines. So when you're in a stew about something, you can't quietly hide it. It just doesn't work like that. You know, the second line walks into a room and everybody knows either their energy's really full in the flow of life, or it's cut off in some way, in that tendency of, you know, affecting the field just by the very fact that it hasn't used that quality of its own inquiry and curiosity to find out what's going on. You know, like if I'm triggered, something out there pushed some inner button, some inner belief system, something in my living memory of childhood, teenage years, something that's already happened that is now in repeat. The chemistry has gone off, triggered, defended. So then, you know, the old model of it is, let's push that back at the other. They said the wrong thing, they're doing that. And that's the blaming that occurs. But when you take that pause and you do that pivot, you turn back inside, you use your breath as a stabilizing force. You know, with this sacred breath of life stabilizes us. So if I'm triggered, you know, my breath hasn't gone all the way to the diaphragm anymore. It isn't filling the cauldron of life. You know, it's in my chest. Maybe my shoulders are tight, my throat's constricted. You know, you start to become aware of your body. Your body is really giving you clues. But when you take that sacred breath into the pause, suddenly that flow of life is allowed, that movement that moves through every cell and every tendon, every tissue, that allows that life force and that vitality to bring you back into the naturalness of being. Because the second line is a natural. The first line has to learn a lot more by their very nature to gain their stability. The second line seems to just know what it's good at. It kind of flows into something that somebody has spent, you know, 30 years studying. And the second line flows in and just it's like putting on a new cloak and going, oh, this is just so natural for me to do this. You know, like, you know, I learned to ride a horse when I was 22, and within a year I was winning show jumping ribbons. And people say, oh, you never really can do that when you learn to ride as an adult. But luckily, nobody told me that. So, you know, it was just such a natural thing, because you have living memory. We all have memory, you know. So this second line has that quality to just flow with life in a way that the more it relaxes, the more it ends up in exactly in the right place for whatever that gift of the flow of life is offering to the world, actually, not even to your own second line, but it informs the second line too, because it can be really blind. Not only does it go into denial, which is how it represses things and pretends it's not going on, but also it's blind to its own natural magic. Other people see it, but the second line takes a long time to recognize, because it's simply being itself. Enough?
Yeah,
Well,
it's great. Elijah, do you want to add anything?
Well, it's such a great flow.
So
And I
pick
think,
a couple of gene keys or one.
yeah,
It's really great.
I see a lot in the chat of different line twos, and so there's one of 46.2, the shadow of seriousness, right? And so wherever your shadow and gift, look at these kind of things. How do you accuse others of seriousness? Or when you feel the constriction of everything being so serious, where do you bury your head in the sand of seriousness? Or how do you respond with anger against seriousness and constriction? But then delight, right? Like when delight feels easy, when acceptance feels easy. So with the line two, like tuning into the flow, or one of my teachers always talks about the kink in the hose of your spine, right? Like when constriction or seriousness, or 64.2, confusion and doubt, you can feel we constrict the body. We don't let that flow happen. So I would contemplate what is ecstasy look like if it was spontaneous and at peace with everything around it. That's the 46.2 and its natural purpose. Your purpose is to feel the peace of ecstasy, living spontaneously with this moment. Or 64.2, to be illuminated through the magic of your art, of your life, of imagination, spontaneously. You can't force that kind of imagination. You can't force that illumination. And in fact, it's listening to the reflection of the moment as it is and responding and dancing with it. So what is natural illumination? Just use that word, whatever your combination is. 36.2, natural compassion, or accusing turbulence, or turbulent accusations, right? Make these kind of pairings for yourself and then just feel where they land in your body. And as you take that into your day, you'll start to see all your relationships. Mine is celebration. When I'm genuinely relaxed in my natural state, I can honestly have that smile about it's all chaos. We're all dying. This is a crazy thing to be alive and be a human. But we can celebrate that this is another moment. This is another moment to be connected. I can be at peace with death. That's what, honestly, on a deeper 42.2, being at peace with death and celebrating the magic of that. So I would just keep playing with like putting those words next to each other, and maybe bring in your radiance gene key if you're not finding the right connection, because they're always interwoven, those programming partners. But those are just some ways I play with that combo.
Yeah, and as you're playing, put them in the chat box. It's really nice to see them. Like Elijah was saying, what was it? Accusatory turbulence or whatever. Stick them in the chat box, and the nice ones as well. I'll just say one more little thing, and then we'll move to 3. The repressive tendency of the line 2, burying head in the sand, it can also be like a passive aggressive behavior, because there's a way of accusing someone by doing nothing or by saying nothing, and that's a different form of the same, angry outburst energy. It's just going about it in a different way. So look out for that pattern as well. Line 3. Line 3s are the life's great slippery ones, the slippery ones, the escape artist, and also the adventurer. So, you bring richness to life through embracing both its highs and its lows. Yeah, the line 3, finds its stability through its love of life, through the love of all of it, the love of the journey. The really powerful line 3 is not worried about the goals. It's not worried about like getting to be wealthy or getting to be finding itself, and embracing all aspects. And that's what brings this zest for life, the adventure of life. And then, of course, what comes with that is the ability to laugh at oneself. That's a great inner strength of the line 3, and the outer strength to accept the feelings of others, not to laugh at them, unless it's like with them, but actually just to do the opposite, to really empathize and just really be able to be there with them, because you've suffered too. And the line 3s really, really empathize. And, I can kind of when you get good with these lines, you can drop the whole Gene Keys teaching, and you just pick them up in the field, like you can just pick up, I can just walk around and in a room of people I've never met before. I can pretty much guess what lines they are just from talking to them, and the line 3s are the ones that I would always feel most comfortable being vulnerable with, because they wear it, that, they have that sense of nakedness. And so you feel that through them, and you relax around them because of that. And because they accept you and you feel accepted, even though, you would even tell them some of your nastier secrets, and because you'd feel that they wouldn't judge you. And their enthusiasm is contagious. That's the great gift of the line 3. But then we dive in the other side and we see all the kind of the other, different story, avoiding anything that makes you feel uncomfortable. And there's all kinds of ways to avoid stuff. The repressive is diverting attention away from yourself. Think about this like, you're trying to get to a difficult subject with someone and they keep changing the subject, and or you're trying to get to know someone and you're getting, and they're really like they've opened up to a certain level and then they won't go beyond that level, and they keep like twisting away and changing it and shifting, or they move off, and it's like every time you try and go a little bit deeper, they're not there anymore. There's some excuse, there's some way they've got out of it. And the reactive tendency is about creating dramas. It's about processing. They're always processing. The third line loves to process, tell you my feelings over and over and over again. It's like, and it actually can be an addictive thing. You tell, it's tears, and then it's laughter, and then it's tears, and then it's whatever. And it's like you could get caught in the loop of over processing, and never actually get past the emotion and into the deeper, what's underlying the emotion, the love or the pain that's underneath the actual emotion. So it can be really slippery. And so look at this for yourself. I know lots of you are probably thinking, oh, my partner's like that. We're all like this in certain ways, some of us more than others, but the third line is really adept at kind of, most of the time it's unconscious, so most of the time they don't know they're doing it, and it's all about commitment is what it comes back to, commitment, like the fear of commitment. And sometimes that can also be overcommitment, but it's essentially an overcommitment is a form of is actually a form of not making a commitment in some way, because you're not making a commitment to yourself, to your own being. By overcommitting to something else or someone else, you're not actually committing to being authentic in yourself. So it's all about the fear of commitment, because what happens if you fully commit 100% to the path of love, you're going to hurt. That's what's going to happen. It's going to hurt. But you have to go through that hurt. You have to embrace that hurt. That's what becomes, you have to you should change your attitude. It's instead of contracting, you like begin to open and go, okay, well, what's the worst that could happen? My heart will close. Okay, but it'll open again slowly tomorrow, maybe, and if you get good at it, it'll, you can bring it back to life quite quickly, because you take care of yourself. And if you get hurt, then you know it's not the end of the world, because you know that you can take care of yourself, rather than blaming someone else and projecting out like, you made me feel like this, or he made me feel like this. And that's another thing, by the way, the line 3. The line 3 is a great gossip. It loves to like project over there about something, because it's the part of the emotional melodrama, the shadow. It's like, talk about something else, someone else's relationship, anything but my own hurt. But actually, if you listen to someone gossiping about someone else or kind of bad mouthing someone else, you realize is they're actually talking about themselves. Think about that, And anyway, so some of the themes of the line 3, both up, positive, negative, Tanmayo or Elijah, you want to pick some from the
Yeah.
chat?
Yeah, I finally figured out how to be on YouTube and not have all that reverberation of sound, so I can actually see the chat now. I was attracted to the 59 and the line 3. I feel like that's such a core piece for everyone that here is that intimacy and transparency and dishonesty that can come through that 59. And the line 3, you know, it's this word commitment is such a powerful thing for the line 3, and especially in relating, you know. So, but my experience also of line 3s is when they come to find that secure place in themselves, it's not even the big things in life, you know, it's that they're often have difficulty with what do I do in my profession, or what is this the right relationship, so avoiding the commitment. But it's really good for somebody to come to see that the only commitment and stability you can have is in the moment. Commit to the moment of what is the truth of reality of this moment. And I think, you know, we have all this conditioning about a commitment, which is terrifying for a line 3. You say yes to something, you should be doing it for 30 years. You know, the intimacy of a moment for a line 3 can be as full as having a moment with somebody at the train station that can warm them in their emotional juices all day, or having a deeply intimate, fertile sexual discovery with someone, but they don't know if they want to marry them yet. You know, that's like, you know, it's that conditioning of what is supposed to be. And I often feel like for the line 3, it's the little commitments. It's really about fear of making a mistake, because they don't know what to commit to, because they know the changeable nature that they actually are, and they've been punished for it. You know, the child that says, oh, I want to learn the flute, mummy. So mummy pays for flute lessons. And 3 weeks later, the child says, oh, no, but it's the piano this week. You know, and the parents get furious. Why can't you stick with something? They're not built to do that. They need the taste of it. They need to experience their fingers on the flute. They need to feel their lips on it. They need to see how that breath moves through that instrument, what it does in their auric field. And when they're done, they're done. And this is exactly how the line 3 is learning all the time. They're becoming intimately aware of themselves. So before that intimacy can occur in the way that we think of intimacy in a relationship, it has to happen inside. But they can learn intimacy through being with the other. They can come to know themselves in a way that they're experimenting, but very often it needs some communication of who you are. But until you know that, it's very difficult for that line 3 who judges itself a lot for this apparency of making mistakes all the time. But those mistakes are actually the very nature of being here, experimenting, experiencing life. And the stability comes from the commitment to the moment, and from realizing that changer has actually an inner stability within itself when it's not avoiding. But as Richard was saying, it's the fear of feeling all those feelings. So rather avoid them, because now we're entering the emotional field. 1 and 2 is physical, stable types in a different way. But the third line is we can't do without them. And yet sometimes in a group they can be scary, because we know that transformation is going to happen here. Never quite know what the third line is seeing, or what it's gonna what it sees needs adapting in our field. This is its gifts. So that 59, you know, sometimes in relationships, you know, the third line is tasting. It's a great thing for some third lines when they're in some stages of life to be able to say, I'm actually not here for a committed relationship. And then they wake up in the morning 25 years later in the same relationship that they've committed to every morning. So it's like when you take away some of these ideas about intimacy and what it means, the third line can come into that deep adventure of the highs and lows of life and bring with it that contagious, gentle enthusiasm and holding that it can give to the other person through being non-judging, because it knows what it's like to fall over so many times and have to pick itself up and learn from it.
Mm-hmm.
That's my little piece there, Elijah.
As we transition, I just have to say, as we learn from it, as we laugh from it, and this joyful honesty, and I just wanted to say, I think the three it kind of swaps for me is I want to say escape your gift and the adventure of your shadow. So 59.3, escaping intimacy and the adventure of joyfully, honestly going into that shadow of dishonesty. And just remember that that level of commitment of what's inside those shadows is also what blossoms through your, joyful honesty of yourself.
Can I just add one thing there? Because wherever we have a 59, and we all have it, the only reason we are not honest is because we are identified with an image of ourselves. So if I'm holding the image of the good friend, and for some reason, there is something that I don't want to participate in, I avoid, especially if there's a third line in there, I avoid the real truth of what it is, which is to say, I love you, but I don't want to participate in that. Or I really am not enjoying gossiping. This dishonesty comes from holding an image of not being loved, actually. If I really show up as I am, transparently in the world, in a way that's holding love in my heart and the inner truth of my being, I will not be received. So then I don't care what line we have, if any of us is identified with an image of who we think we should be, we use these lines in particular ways to move away from ourselves, to keep hold of an image rather than fall into the intimate truth of the reality that we're living in this moment. Thanks.
Nothing to add.
You
Other
know,
than I thought it was quite amusing that some internet troll dropped in some sex ads in the middle of that transmission, which I thought was very third line.
And also to the chat also that's like, oh, I really resonate with all these and I don't know my line, just a reminder that you probably do have this line somewhere in your gene key profile, but also, as we always say, people before numbers. Like, these are universal patterns, and they're doorways, they're keys, they're access points to awaken this wisdom inside us. So this line 4, for example, I don't have anywhere in my chart or in my human design or in my, but I'm a part of the field of this line 4, and I also have relationships with this line 4. So we're going to encounter all of these patterns in many different ways in our life. And so it's helpful if you do have it, you can bring that doorway to see it for yourself and keep asking that question. Even the ones that don't fully resonate at first, let them simmer, let them percolate inside you. And then also I'm learning what I love about this work, especially as we enter the Venus, is now I have this compassion. So I have a lot of great friends and people in my life who have the line 4 purpose. And I see that politician, that negative nature, the ability to either be the people pleaser, but they're really just numbing their own heart and protecting themselves and rejecting others before they reject you. It's a powerful wall at times, or a mask. It might not even look like a wall, but it's actually this clever mask that I can wear. And sometimes the people that I see in that politician moment, including ways that I play that out, it's not even conscious. Again, this is the purpose. This is a potentially very deep unconscious pattern. And so the nurturer, to see how does it go from that politician and potentially cruel politician that's able to create that division, to the nurturer, to the warm, open-hearted gentleness of the nurturer. And the gene keys, the Venus sequence, shows that it's breath. It's softening the chest. It's accepting authentically what's happening for yourself so that the armor starts to relax and melt away. And the magic of the line 4, and I see this in many people that I love, is when you breathe authentically into yourself and you gently romance yourself into the room, everyone else in the room has the opportunity to melt their heart into the sweetness and the rhythm of the breath that's created, the coherence that's created when you're genuinely present. That line 4 is very influential. It can deeply connect with everyone around it, but not out of like a clinginess or a manipulation, or it's a sweetness, it's an aroma, it's a signature, a magnetic signature. So I have a very close person in my life who has this line 4, and when there's this relaxed and authentic nature, when that mind isn't going what they should be or what they think they should be or what they think they should feel, and what am I feeling and how can they, when they're just present, the whole room shifts. And even on the phone with this person, like the whole environment in my neurology shifts, and I can breathe a little deeper. And I just want to honor wherever you have that line 4, that you have this sweet way to connect us back to the heart, and that is a great gift. So, but it requires you to romance yourself back into this moment, to really be here present with us and relax that armor. And that's a very vulnerable thing to ask. So if you're numb and you realize you're numb, that's the first step, is just, wait a minute, I'm kind of checking out my emotions, I'm not actually even sure what I feel, oh, I'm fine. Well, just feel what that feels like for a second. Just feel the body and the breath, and slow it down for a few moments and just see the texture, feel if it changes, and be gentle with yourself as it melts.
Yeah, and one of the ways you could look at these lines, in a way, it's kind of a fun thing, is like they come up the body, so line 1 would be the base, the base and the legs and the feet and the base, and then line 2 might be that sort of sexual area that's in there, and then line 3 might be the belly around there, and issues of like commitment of the belly, and then line 4 might be like here in the chest and where the heart lives, and so here you see that capacity to nurture and really nurture others and be a server of others, and but in the most beautiful way. So every time you look, if you have a line 4, then have a look and see, what is your nurture? How does it want to come out? Through which gift and which city would it like to come out and nurture others? And it's also, it can be, some people can get stuck in this, like giving, but without really giving, giving where you're not really, but your heart isn't really in it, but you're in a giving role, and so actually there's a part of you that starts to feel resentment building up, and then it comes out, it spills out as a kind of bitterness and a kind of, so you're not giving from an abundance, you're giving, either because you've got stuck in that role, or you see yourself in that role and you don't know how to get out. Or, we often do that in relationships. We want to save someone, we want to jump in and we save that person because we see how wounded they are. And that's a way of getting caught in this energy of this 4, because you've left your own ability to nurture yourself. You've got to nurture yourself and have enough of yourself so that it spills over, and then it's effortless. It's no longer an effort. That's what this 4th line is all about, this effortless giving, this effortless loving, generosity, unlimited generosity in a way. And then you see the other side of it, where it kind of goes, where it can be very numb, and this whole, so again, it can be giving, but it's from a numb place, So it's not real giving. It's just kind of pretense. And that's why it's the politician, because the politician is all about, pretense, that as an archetype, as we're not saying that all politicians are like that, but, that's what we're using it as here. It's like that, saying one thing and doing another, and meaning another, and that kind of, that game that's played, that we sometimes play with others to get something. It's always to get something or to prove something, and it's based on rejection. The fourth line is terrified of being rejected, and has been rejected for sure. This is another thing about these lines. If you've got these lines, then you're going to kind of have these experiences probably in your childhood, probably as residues, and so there's going to be some, trauma around it that is like, because I was rejected very strongly at one point in my life because of that. And I'm sure that actually applies to all of us, but fourth line will make that into a pattern for the rest of their life, and that's why it says reject others before they would reject you. So look for that, and also a final thing I'd say about fourth line is it's all about making friendships, building friendships. That's why it's nurture. So have a look and see if you're a fourth line, that's one of the ways you create stability in your life, is you build all these, well, it doesn't have to be many, but you build and nurture really special friendships, and friendships take, a lot of work, and you have to kind of move through patterns and stuff with friends over time, but building that, and also with your, you have to make friends with, in some sense, your partner or your people you're close to. You have to kind of build those pathways of friendship, and that's about listening, and that's about being with people, and taking the time to be with people, really be with them, and often we get distracted. Someone was asking about 56 line 4, that's a classic, like you get distracted away from putting the energy into your relationships, and then your relationships falter and you wonder why, because you spend your whole time distracted, and your partner's going like, you're distracted, but you're not listening because you're distracted, and then you distract yourself with something else, and so have a look at the gene key, have a look at the pattern of the line, and you begin to put together the story of your relationship. And remember, like, focus the majority of your energy on the gift, on the left side here, the nurturer. Like, really look at if you've got a fourth line, don't spend too much time worrying about your blocks and they'll react. Just know that they're there and keep an eye out for them. But really put your attention as like, I'm the nurturer. I'm a warm-hearted, open-hearted, beautiful, generous person. Of course I am. I know that. And I just have to be gentle with myself more often and connect deeply with others. And then everything's sorted in my life. So look at yourself in that way and really believe yourself, that you are that. And slowly, that will, because that is what you are, that will start to kind of come alive in you again. And keep an eye out, keep a little bit of attention on those fourth line negative, natures, just to see those are the places you get tripped up. But you're the one that kind of trips yourself up, not someone else. You're the one that trips yourself up. You're the one that gets yourself distracted. You're the one that applies force 34. Key. You're the one that gets arrogant 31st gene key. You're the one that 44 thing that you shouldn't be interfering with. It's you. So you have to kind of take that, own that inside yourself. It's such a powerful thing to do, and that's really the central message of all these lines. Own it for yourself. Line 4, line 5.
Before you go on to line 5, I want. It was
You've got another transmission.
No, it's just that I had to laugh because I was going to say to you, how about the 56.4? And Richard and I both are blessed with 56s. And you've said all of those beautiful things. But what I wanted to say to that fourth line is Imagine how it is when that fourth line is totally open-hearted. It's not even thinking about itself at all. There's no agenda there. There's no nothing. It's just turned up in the fullness of its presence with all of that enrichment and the influence that that open-hearted, enriching intoxication is gifting the world with. So that's that breathing in that energy. And you know, the politician is that I really wanted to add this little piece for all of these lines. They're deeply painful. They're wounds, these avoidances and denials and escapes and shutting down the heart and the politician. Something happened to block the natural sacredness of life, the beauty and the living, loving nature of who we all are. Even if, you know, you might be out there being the rebel thinking, oh, I'm not interested in this love rubbish, you know, it's bullshit, everybody's talking about love, but you might want freedom. And rather than reacting and rebelling against everything, in that sacred moment, you might find that that freedom lives in you, and that doesn't have to be defended in the way that you have learned how to show up for yourself. And that social mask on the 4 has been put in place because they become numb. It's too painful to feel anymore. And there's a frozenness that actually you can feel it in your body, like a little, like glass that has kept you safe inside. All of these lines and archetypes, they have subtle substance. You know, this journey is extremely practical and pragmatic, but also deeply mystical. So just allow yourself to also feel into that rejection, where you might reject yourself fully because you have felt so rejected. Okay.
Great, thank you. Let's get on, because we don't want to end up not talking about the 6th line. Line 5, Elijah, you want to start in there?
The victim or the leader, and exploring this, you know, on this negative nature, self-pity is a really powerful piece, and being lost in the labyrinth of your mind, or what does it say? You create a web of illusions that keeps you trapped in your mind. And I think for me, that line 5, victim, one of its important things is that self-fulfilling prophecy of creating evidence for that victim story, or in its reactive tendency, trying to control others by imposing that belief system. And you can see this on the world. We start to get at the line 5, we're getting very transpersonal now. And that impact, you can see it on a world stage too, of these like stories and webs and all of the infinite traps of truth and reputation, and finding our way back to healthy use of power. And that's why the line 5 and its leadership is the ability to inspire those who are drawn to you. And you might see that leader and you might definitely resonate. Yeah, I am a leader. And I do, you know, speak on that large platform for the world. But also this might be a deeply subconscious, like mycelium leader, one who just by the way that you are speaking to the person at the store and your children and the way that you interact with people, you are leading our hearts, the human heart, to find clarity, right? And so that when we speak from compassion and wisdom through the voice of the leader, it doesn't just make you I have the flag and I'm guiding us to a particular cause, though that may naturally come out of your mission in your life. So look at that inner strength of seeing things clearly for yourself, using the incredible magic of the line 5. Line 5 is about power and magic and being able to charismatically and efficiently articulate something so that you can universalize this wisdom, which is why its outer strength is giving clarity to others. You're practical, you're strong, you're an incredible voice of wisdom for us. So practice with the voice, practice hearing and trusting and feeling the vibration of your voice. But be aware of your impact, right? Be aware of the stories of being lost or trapped in that power dynamic. You might bring power dynamics forward in your life because of this magic. And it's about finding solace inside those power dynamics. Where have I abused and misused power in my life? And where has that been abused and misused against me? And how can I be a voice, a leader for using that power in a compassionate way? And then look at that gene key and that gift. And how can I be a revolution? How can I be a voice for the revolution that doesn't burn everything down, but turns the wheel to finding this compassionate rebirth that trusts in the both decay and rising of this change that's happening inside me? The line 5 has a phoenix energy to it. We're going to need to learn and grow through these changes and then have that power be emanated to us. So speak with compassion and wisdom, and be mindful when the traps of the mind start defending itself or feeling like you're constantly needing to be on the defensive. Come back into solitude, come back into singing or chanting or just being with your voice, and feel that gift from yourself. And then in turn, how that can actually bring clarity for others. But it's not fixing them. They're not broken. They're not wrong. You're articulating something, and your voice matters. So if you feel repressed, we want your voice to know that it matters. We want to bring those voices to the surface. And if maybe you already have that strength, potentially you're here to bring a voice for those that don't feel that they have a voice right now. And that's real compassion in action. And the line 5 has a magic here in the world and in its purpose. And it's not about doing, but it is about the tone of voice and how you bring that forward in every relationship.
Yeah, and sometimes we create stories inside our minds about another person, and that story, we just go on building the story, and also about ourselves, because we're, the victim can also be the victimizer, and so we invent all kinds of layers and levels and build this whole story in our minds, and it just goes round and round and round and round, and actually it's just a story over the top of that person. That person ultimately, even if their behavior is, if there's a pattern coming through them that is, kind of causing disturbance, underneath it, they're just a little child, just like you, just like me. And so we build these webs in our minds around people, and then we get caught in them and we cannot get out, because they just go on spinning. And that keeps us in like really tight behavioral patterns ourselves. So as Elijah gave really good advice there, actually, like I think you did, Elijah, like just do something that breaks you out of the mind, so maybe sing, or maybe do some yoga, or maybe just kind of realize you're in one of those spins. I call it the Eden loop. You're kind of in this loop that where you just can't get out of it, and it keeps you from kind of entering into like a higher consciousness. It keeps you from breaking through. So you got to see that about yourself. And this is, again, even if you don't have line 5s, this can be a tendency, that's around in relationships anywhere. It might be your partner has it, and the way we see each other, what we expect of each other. It's like, assumptions that we have because someone's behaved in a certain way. We assume that they will continue to behave in that way. And our assumption actually reinforces that whole field, and so these loops kind of, they're more than just in your own brain. They're actually in the field, and they connect other people into them, so they actually bridge us in some way. The 5th line is really powerful, charismatic. The thoughts that you have, the words that you use, I did this talk earlier today, and I talked about how super sensitive our DNA is. It's so sensitive, and there's 10 billion miles of it inside one body, 10 billion miles of DNA, and it's super duper duper sensitive, and it's imprinted by our thoughts and our feelings. You upload and you download, and that's it. That's your software. So the way you think about yourself, about others, is actually creating that in the field around you. And then you then help to reinforce it in the other, and you reinforce their pattern. And remember this, that whenever you're looking at like a relationship or even a dynamic with a group, you're looking at combinations of these lines interacting. And that's like, so a fifth line with a first line and a fifth line with a second line. So you've got an accuser with a victim, and you've got an, you see them all interacting, and then that's where you kind of realize they reinforce each other. So if you are playing that victim role or the victimizer role, then you will get back the accuser role, most likely, unless that person's really doing their inner work, and that's what's so valuable about this Venus sequence teaching, is because and that's why we learn all of them. And they're equally of importance to us because we meet them in the world from time to time. And then, but know your own and know it well, and really contemplate it and see it and look back in your relationships and see those patterns and see how you did that and how power has always been your thing. And maybe you've used it in a manipulative way, and the sex can be a power, and money can be a power, and lots of things can be used as power over someone else to manipulate them, guilt, to get them to do things, or to try and get them to do things, or to try and get them to feel bad about themselves, or to take the power away from them and keep it for yourself. You get caught into these games. And I'm sorry, I'm leaning on the shadow side, but I want us to really kind of see through these patterns, and that so that we can give birth to the new world, and the true leaders can emerge, and those true leaders have to have dropped away those old patterns of those old paradigms, and they have to own their own patterns and realize, God, I'm manifesting this. This is my responsibility, even though that person's playing out that role. Like somewhere along the line, I've created this for myself, and only if you own that can you be a really good leader, and people will listen to you because they'll feel that you own your own stuff. And not all the time either, sometimes you don't. And that's why they'll also trust you, because you recognize when you don't, and you're like, you nailed me, and that hurts, right? To own it and let your ego kind of feel that, that wounded pride of like, I blew that one, but we're all like work in progress, all of us, every single one of us. And we're doing our best. And so we need to kind of remember that and give each other slack, and be kind and generous towards ourselves. So anyway, I enjoyed that fifth line. Thank you. I learned some things from listening to you guys as well. We should probably get on with the sixth line.
Yes. Six. Shall I start? I think we might all have something to say about the sixth line, seeing as we all hold 6 lines. So this is the visionary, the wise, far-sighted person. Inner strength is including yourself at every level. Outer strength, being a role model for others. Highest potential, your trust in life helps others to trust themselves. And the negative nature, the judge, your distrust in life keeps you isolated. Repressed tendency, being uninterested and aloof. Reactive is disempowering others with your intellect. And the main block, you exclude yourself from life through your judgment of everything and everyone. The first thing that comes for me with this is that Richard, when you were talking about the first line, you were talking about the first line isolating, and it's a very different experience. The first line is the ground, they disappear inside the body, they're gone. If you're around a first line when they disappear, it's like they're physically standing in the room, but they've just gone inside. But the sixth line leaves the body. The sixth line just says, I'm out of here. It's too intense. It's the line that goes through these 3 stages of life. The first 28 to 30 years, it's actually experiencing the world as a third line. It's bumping into things, it's making mistakes that of course are not mistakes. It's experimenting, it's finding out what works and what doesn't work. And it's actually finding out what the hell is going on here. You know, the sixth line knows that it's a starry being and it's here for whatever its purposes are. And the sixth line has an overview of what the vision that it wants to see in the world. It might not think of itself like that, but it cares very deeply. For many of us that are here, there's a strong reality that life was here before this body and life is here after this body. But what is here is the themes that we've been living and working out for eons together as soul groups, as fractals, as friends, as the collective field. And there's a knowing inside that this lifetime, this incarnation is an incredible opportunity to bring our awareness to the shadow frequencies that we're really here to release and live out the more higher frequencies or resonances that are held in the field, to learn to love, respect, honor each other in all ways, in all manner, to give dignity to life itself. So the sixth line comes in with some of these far-sighted ideas and wisdoms that actually become embodied by the time they're 50. From 30 to 50, they do something that we often talk about it as they're kind of not in the body and they're not out of the body. They're kind of here. They're sitting in the crown chakra observing. And sometimes they observe from their very arrogant, aloof place and think that everybody else is completely bonkers. And the only one who knows anything, of course, is the sixth line. They're just so full of wisdom and education. And that's where they cut themselves off. You know, that's that place that can also go to division, that can create the them and us frequency, which is the very thing that the sixth line abhors. It's here for its caring of the all-inclusive nature of life. But when it cuts itself off in any manner, and it will cut itself off through not being interested. The sixth line has to be interested. And for me, I can say it's a life work of, I had a beautiful relationship. He's still a really good friend of my life. And his love affair with life was and is soccer. And suddenly my friends were saying, what the hell is wrong with you? What is this thing about soccer? You've never been interested in soccer? I said, no, I'm not interested in soccer. I'm interested in Daniel, and he's interested in soccer. You know, so this is when you drop into a field with someone and embrace their loves in a way that I'm not going to suddenly rush out and buy tickets for Arsenal, you know, but I might go with him and enjoy it for the joy of his joy. So there is that opening to realize that my interest doesn't have to be limited to the way that I see the world. It can be opened to all kinds of ways in which the world is being held. And sometimes to be able to be with others who hold vastly different views of the world to me. Richard talked about this earlier, when I'm not disturbed by their views. I'm simply in that embodied space as at 50, having gained all of that knowledge that I've been seeking and trying to understand how the world works from that third line position for the first 30 years, but also as it has grown and deepened and become this embodied experience, then comes that really preciousness of that sixth line, who's truly here, in a fullness of itself, where it's grounded in its own vision. It's grounded in the wisdom that it's here to share. So for me, that's a special reality that comes with that sixth line growth. So for those of you who watch Lord of the Rings, 6 lines need a long time. And I just feel that all 6 lines are ints. If you don't know what an int is, you'll have to watch Lord of the Rings, but they take a very long time to grow into themselves. And all of the 6 lines has felt like aliens in some way, like they watch the world and they observe it, but they feel like they're outside of it until that real embodiment occurs. And then they're truly here in the whole magic and mess of what it means to be human.
Yeah, you got to get your feet wet and get back into the mud as a 6th line.
Yeah.
Include yourself. That's the key. Include yourself. No one else is going to include you, you know, in that relationship, in that business, in that job, in that whatever it is, in that group, in that community. You know, you can go on saying, well, I feel I'm an outsider. That's what 6 lines say. I'm an outsider. I sit on the fence. You know, I don't belong here. But it's because you haven't included yourself. You know, you have to include yourself. No one else can do that except you. And it is like, come into the form, have the boldness and the valor and an ability to bring bring all of your soul here. You know, so much of our soul is out of the form, you know, and so we, you know, it takes huge like transformation to bring it all down and in. The power of our soul, the mightiness of our soul is just extraordinary. And the 6th line, you know, as the visionary, kind of can see further and than anyone else, perhaps, you know, because that it's with that soul quality that comes in and incarnates and then embodies itself here. Yeah, and you have to get dirty. The 6th line part of it doesn't like, it's like, ooh, I don't want to get dirty. You know, I like being all pure and transcendent, you know, and actually, what's the point in being in one of these things unless you're going to get dirty? Because then you're not really fully here. So it's about trust. That is the key word for the 6th line, trust. You know, you have to learn to trust, you have to learn to surrender, you know, and you know, that's where your strength comes from, through trusting in life, trusting in this here now, trusting in this process right now. Trust it absolutely. You know, you're not in control of it. You are not in control of it. You've got to just trust it. And then out of that place will come your embodied, you know, visionary wisdom, you know, and yeah, then your life, your relationships, and your connection to others and in the community will all kind of suddenly come together in beautiful coherence. You know, and you can put aside that judgment, which was just a kind of lofty pattern that you used, you know, to protect yourself, you know, to justify, you know, why you thought you were an outsider, you know, because then as an outsider, you felt like you could judge others, you know, you could look down from your mountaintop and judge them, and usually judge them as inferior in some way. So, and those patterns can be so subtle, you know, in the way that works. So let those things go, come in, be amongst the fray, and be a human. You know, it's fun. I mean, 6th line is my line. I've had to learn this lesson over and over and over and over again. And they dragged me kicking and screaming off my hill into the world. And may it continue long. Anyway, Elijah, anything to add, or should we round up just a little bit? We're talking about the Venus.
You've done a great job. Yeah, I think you've done a perfect job, and thanks for including yourself down from the mountain and beaming your wisdom with all of us. And
right,
yeah,
tell us about the Venus retreat. A few words, you know, because people are probably going to be going now because we've reached the end. But before you go, just hear a few words from Elijah and the 3 of us about the Venus retreat that's coming up.
For me, it's an invitation into a container of grace that when we feel lost and confused, we're going to breathe into a collective love ship, as I keep calling it. And we're going to leave dock in November and go on this 6-month journey to take our time. And it's an individual journey. And there's plenty of videos. There are live Q&As. There are community calls to share and witness each other. There are synchronized meditations. But more than any of the stuff, it is an invitation in your life to take a little bit of time, and hopefully like a couple hours a week, to just give yourself a sacred space to drink in this wisdom of you, to journal, to experience, to take an introspective time, but know that you're in a collective field of people all over the world, in many different countries and different languages and different whole stratas of experience. And they're also going on the same journey to find the gifts inside their shadows, to love themselves, to fall in love with life at this deep, deep level. So we're going to walk through the Venus sequence one sphere at a time, 1 month at a time, and have all these amazing ways where you can witness each other with as a community and you as an individual, because it's linked to your Venus sequence. And Tanmayo and I will be there. And of course, Richard's in all of the courses. You'll have plenty of his wisdom, and hopefully the mystical vagabond will come join us for a few events in between. But we also have 41 hosts who have been guides and ambassadors devoting their own journey in discovering this wisdom. And they're going to be holding some loving space for us at the calls and the Q&As. So it's a really rich field. And it's what I'm choosing to do to help embrace the inner work that I need to do and to live with even more integrity and love in my outer work. So I'll be here as an ally, and I hope that you do join us. Tanmayo?
Well, that was all just beautifully said, and a great understanding of what we're going to do on the road, all the points that we'll touch. I feel that I want to just bring this forward again, that for many people here, there is that deep understanding that, you know, that the streams of consciousness incarnate, not perhaps the personality models or any of those things from the old understandings of karma, but that spark of light that you are, that's been traveling through time, is here again. So what are we here for if it is not to come to know the deepest aspects of our being? And can I give that to myself, would be a question. And I feel that even if that's not the truth of our reality, we are now immersed in a deep understanding of transgenerational trauma. So whether it is past life experiences or transgenerational trauma, we have the opportunity to start healing these deep streams of woundedness that have been moving through this field of humanity. Our own in particular, that we may live the blessings that we are. But through that blessing, the whole field is somehow being influenced. And we know this now. It's not just a metaphysical idea. It has been proven in many, many ways. So we give this to ourselves, but we're also calling in, we are the ones we're waiting for. It's not somebody else. We can't wait for anybody else. I am the one that I've been waiting for, and there is no me without you. So for me, it's coming into that core place of, can I really live more of me? Can love move through me? Can I rest in the sovereignty of being without making you wrong? Can I open-heartedly receive you even when it's not the truth of my living reality, but still not need to fix you because I'm looking at a soul on a journey through time and timelessness that I don't know what their mission is, but I know mine. I come to open to it every moment when it's changing, when it's challenging, when I'm in crisis, when my team is in crisis, when the world is in crisis, when there's wars and famine and flooding. Can I be that beacon of light amidst it all? Can I give that to my life in this incarnation? Because the one thing that is clear for me, when I leave this beloved biological spacesuit, the only thing that goes with me is consciousness. So let me do what I can. Let my work in the world be a reflection of this incarnation.
Beautiful message, Tanmayo. Really love that. Like, I think that's a mythic call to everyone watching this. Like, what an opportunity this is. You know, one of these Venus retreats, we've only done one once. We might not do another one. You know, they take so much effort for us to put on. I mean, I hope we will. But they really are transgenerational trauma cleaning events. And you're not the same person at the end as you were at the beginning. It's just, you're not, you know, and even if you're like skimming the surface, you know, for those 6 months, you know, you're still going to have some transformational experiences. You can't not, because the nature of this Venus sequence is it's embedded in our DNA. So yours is embedded. These are algorithms that are real inside you. So you start putting your attention on them, even a little bit. If there's another 1,000 people putting their attention on them as well, they're putting the attention on the field which you're in. You know? So as you move through that field, like we're all doing the work on each other, for each other. And it quickens it, it exacerbates things, it throws things up, it makes it easier for us to transform. And we have this field of support as well, and the support of the wisdom of these teachings, which are really you know, powerful. And the narrative as well, there's a mythic narrative that you follow. It's the kind of journey of enlightenment, if you like. You know, and it's creative, it's colorful, it's, you know, there's a right brain route as much as there's the left brain route. It's not something that you have to learn, you know, there's not stuff to learn, there's just stuff to imbibe. You just take it in, you know, however you can, and then the transformation happens on its own. You just trust in it. So it's hard to explain. You know, when we gathered the testimonials from the last one, at the end, people were sort of going like, I have no idea how I would explain this experience to someone else, you know, because it's magical, it's transcendent, but it will go deep into the roots of your being and change you. I think that's all I can say. And, you know, it's like Elijah said, it's like being on a cruise ship. You know, the ship leaves, I think, 8th of November, right? If you're not on it, then it's gone. 6 months is out to sea. You know, you missed it. Sorry, you have to wait a few more years for the next one. So do it now, if you can. If you can stretch to it, if you're up for it, if you kind of want that, you know, you want that now, and the world needs it, I tell you. You know, I encourage you to have the experience. Anyway, I think we've said enough. And there's lots of information on our web pages, you know, on jinkies.com, and we've had links all, you know, being put in the box. And there's lots of stuff about the Venus sequence and the retreat, so you can really look in. And there are videos by me and Elijah and Tanmayo describing it, and the patterns and what happens each week and how it's going to work, and yeah, and questions as well, Q&A, because all the questions you have we've already heard, so they're already there answered if you go and look. Anyway, much love from me, and had a lovely time talking through these lines with you all today. And thank you so much, Tanmayo and Elijah. I've learned so much here today from you two. You're incredible. You're going to be incredible retreat leaders. That's all I can say. I'm coming to be the little boy in the little naughty boy in the corner.
Thank you.
Might heckle you.
Oh dear. Wonderful. Thank you, both of you. It was delightful. I have a little, you know, sometimes when I'm up at 4 to be ready for a 5 a.m., you will hear me grumbling away somewhere. But the moment I see you two, and Yasko's behind that lovely screen, our gorgeous tech host for today, it's like all of that grumbling just melts away and dissolves. And I'm just so grateful and happy and delighted to be here with you and enriched by it.
Me too. Yeah, and thank you all just for giving your evening, morning, day, whenever you are, like, so you gave us your time. I really appreciate it. We really, it's really kind of you. And if you're watching this, on a replay as well, even if we've left and you're watching it years down the line, just know that the Venus Sequence self-study course is here for you, and you can do it, and you can join the Gene Keys, be part of the Gene Keys community and get the support in the forums. And you can take it into your life. It's been designed in that way so that anyone can do it on their own, or I recommend doing it with company because it's about relationships, but it's designed so that you can do it on your own as well. So it'll have an impact however you're doing it. But yeah, good luck and have a great voyage.
Yes.
Thank you, everyone. We'll see you on the journey. We'll see you next week for some chemistry.
Yeah. Chemistry.
Yes. How nice. We will. Bye, everyone.
Farewell.
Bye. Thank you, Yasko.
Thank you, Yasko.
I'm going to scoot. I have Clubhouse soon.
Oh, cool.
Yeah,